full list of materials can be found in the description below. I'm using framing tape, but you can use masking tape. I'm using the tape to mask out the birch trees, and as you can see here, I put the tape onto the paper and I'm tearing carefully, very carefully, sort of tearing off strips and thin bits. It is a little bit tricky all the same, so be patient with it. It's really effective because it allows you to really sort of paint all the foliage without having to worry about getting any paint on those birch trees. Next step is to use some masking fluid, and this is to mask out the very sort of thin branches. And I'm using a cocktail stick to apply the masking fluid, and I'm sort of painting or applying the masking fluid here and there, and I will allow my painting to dry naturally. Don't blow dry your masking fluid because it can be a little bit tricky to remove it if you do so. And now I'm going to allow my painting to dry naturally. So these are the colours that I'm using. I'm using burnt umber, Paynes grey and permanent yellow. You could use a black, a burnt sienna and a cadmium yellow. I'll put some alternative colours in the description below. So I'm only painting using one colour here, just one wash over the whole of the painting. Nice big puddle. I'm mixing this with my size 10 brush just to get lots and lots of paint. Remember, watercolour dries so much paler, so sort of go for one shade darker than you feel is comfortable almost, because you'll always be disappointed that it dries so much paler. So have plenty of paint. And once you've mixed up your colours, then it's time to wet your paper. I'm using a large, flat, soft head brush, and I'm tilting here just to get rid of any puddles so everything's sort of even. So just work your way around the edges and softly brush that paper so you've got that even sort of wet sheen on there before you start painting on your yellow paint. I always say to my students, large area, large brush, small area, small brush, or large brush, but I'm using this large flat 1.5 inch brush here just to apply the yellow. Just sort of really load your brush and apply that yellow liberally. It's such a lovely sort of stage this, because it's just working with one colour, wet in wet. So I'm going to dry my painting, and my next stage is to apply more masking fluid on the dry surface. This is actually to mask out some of those very thin light grasses that you can see in the foreground there. I'm also applying some of this beneath the trees as well with the cocktail stick. I'm using the Scourer side of a sponge here to apply masking fluid to the foliage area in the trees. So as you can see, I'm just wiping off the excess there. I'm just going to tap this gently onto the dry surface, and this will reserve the very light yellow foliage of the trees. It's really effective and it goes a long way. I would like to point out that you want to tap gently the sponge. Don't press too hard, because if you do, you lose that sort of textured mark. So really just tap lightly. But what did surprise me about the Scourer sponge is it creates some wonderful textures, but two, it goes a long way. I didn't actually have to dip into the masking fluid at all. So I was quite pleased with that. So I'm going to allow my painting again to dry naturally, and what I'm doing now is I'm using a natural sponge, but you can use the Scourer if you want to, or a dry brush technique as well. I will be demonstrating for you the dry brush technique, but first of all I'm going to mix up some colours for the sponging. So I've added some Paynes grey to the yellow there, so it's a bit of a mid to dark green to the right. This here is more of a light to mid green, so it's more of a yellow sort of green, adding sort of more Paynes grey here. So this is a very dark green, just added a touch more water there, maybe a touch of yellow as well, just to, it looked a bit too much like a Paynes grey. And at the top here I'm getting rid of my yellow and just adding another sort of colour. I just want a variety of colours. I'm also using burnt umber and Paynes grey for a lovely dark colour for the shadows as well. So I'm going to demonstrate the dry brush technique. So first of all, sort of load your brush, take the excess water as you saw there with the paper towel. And what I'm doing is, if you see there, I'm twiddling the brush at the bottom and I'm using the belly of the brush. So it's a dry brush in that it hasn't got a lot of paint on it and you get some texture. So you use that belly as I pointed out there. Another way of doing it is just sort of brush that belly sort of sideways onto the paper there. Now, the only thing I would say about this technique, it does wear your brushes out. So perhaps if you like this technique, don't use your best brushes. But as you can see, it created some lovely textures there. So I've just rinsed off my brush now and I am using the sponge. So I'm going to start off with the yellow green, tapping very gently onto the dry surface. A sponge does soak up a lot of paint, so do make sure you mix up plenty of paint and keep sort of loading your sponge and tapping gently onto the paper, trying to vary the angle as well, so don't print the same pattern all of the time. Now I'm applying the more medium sort of green wash here, as you can see, just swiped it there, and this is sort of damp into damp, and I'm just tapping it very, very gently. And now I am sponging in the dark greens here, damp into damp. If you look at the photograph, there's lots of dark green shadows in that foliage there. So I'm just tapping that in. So do try to keep some of the light and mid green as well. So as you can see, I'm just tapping away and always keep collecting fresh paint as well. If you don't have a natural sponge, remember you can use a scourer or the side of your brush, or even stipple with your paintbrush as well, whatever you feel comfortable. But if you've got any ideas you'd like to share about painting foliage, please share them in the comments section below. I'm using the spritzer bottle now to spray the sponging here, just to kind of reawake it, to wet it. It won't actually spoil what you've done, it just actually introduces some moisture, because what next I'm going to be doing is using some Brusho. This is olive green Brusho. I will put a link in the description about the Brusho medium if you'd like to learn more about it. I've pierced a hole in the top of the lid with a push pin and I'm tapping my finger onto the Brusho pot to allow the pigment to be released onto the wet surface. I'm using some black here for the very sort of dark green colours. Now you don't have to use Brusho, you can just stick with the sponging, so don't worry. But for those of you that have actually got some, it's fun to do and it creates some lovely textures and colours as well. Next, I'm using just ordinary table salt, just a little bit. I'm just going to sprinkle it onto the damp surface. I told you I was going to use the kitchen sink. I literally am. A lot of these products can be found around the house, and I'm just sprinkling it on. I'm softening now the sort of bottom of the sort of foliage area there and wet the entire foreground. And I'm just painting in some light green, that's the yellow with a bit of Paynes grey in the foreground there with my size 10 brush, wet into wet. Remember, you have masking fluid there that is actually reserving that yellow underneath as well, so you've got that protecting the lighter grasses. I'm just putting a little bit more of the Paynes grey. It's almost like a mustard colour here. You could even add a little bit of the burnt umber to this wash, and just sort of painting sort of damp into wet, just to sort of keep the sort of fuzzy shapes of these grasses here, but also trying to keep the light as well, and the little patches of shadows cast by the trees there as well, just building up light to dark here, wet into wet, damp into wet, and then damp into damp when I'm using the darker colours, but really trying to keep my lights as well. So I'm just adding a tiny bit of burnt umber there, just to make the colour a little bit more golden, a little bit more warm. That's what I loved about this photograph. It's got these lovely gorgeous colours, and also the fact that you're only using 3 colours, keeping everything nice and simple. So I'm mixing up some Paynes grey now, still actually mixing with my size 10 brush, actually, not my size 6. I just feel like I need to get plenty of paint here. Added some creamy yellow. So this is damp paint, it's thicker, it's creamier, and I'm painting damp into damp. With the tip of my brush in the foreground here, I have swapped to my size 4 brush actually, because I wanted to make some smaller marks and I didn't want it to bleed too much, especially painting with this damp to damp technique. So I'm just sort of using the flick of my brush, really loading the brush each time and painting these smaller grasses, which are the shadows under the tree as well. So I'm painting grasses and shadows at the same time and just using the tip of the brush as I go off into the distance as well, so everything gets a little bit smaller, touch paler. So I'm applying a little bit more of the Paynes grey to that green there and just being quite bold because these are the trees in the foreground, so the cast shadows here are the largest and the darkest as well. So just take your time here, just load your brush. If you find it's bleeding too much, take the excess off on a paper towel and just apply it. But remember, try and keep those lights as well. So you've got shadow lights as well. And as the shadows go away, they get smaller and paler, and the gaps between them, the lighter areas, get smaller as well. So I'm using the size 6 brush here, mixing up some burnt umber and Paynes grey. So it's quite a dark, creamy colour, not a lot of water, and painting the dark shadows now, damp into damp underneath the tree, starting at the back here, using smaller marks and larger marks as I come into the sort of middle distance foreground area as well, but also trying to sort of make them look like they're grasses as well, painting them like a sideways Z, so going up and down, and that creates the look of sort of grasses. I'm also applying more of a burnt umber and the yellow with a touch of Paynes grey as well to get that lovely warm tonal value there as well, painting some of the grasses damp into the foreground, but always bearing in mind that to keep that light as well, using the plastic card now just to kind of lift, not so much lift off the paint, but maneuver the paint, so sort of show the sort of more of a spiky tops of grasses, and doing the same with the cocktail stick here. You can also scratch into the surface of the paper as well. That is permanent, but it gives you some very thin dark lines and it is fun to do. And I think, so I don't overwork it, I'm going to allow my painting to dry naturally to allow the salt to work. As you can see, there's some yummy textures in the foliage there. I'm just removing now the framing tape carefully. Don't pull too hard. You may tear your paper, especially if you use masking tape. What I would suggest is blow dry this after you've dried your salt naturally. Just sort of use heat on the framing tape or masking tape just to warm the glue up and then remove it, and it prevents the tearing of the paper. So I'm very gently sort of carefully removing this to reveal white sort of silver birch trees, which I'm really excited about because obviously I can see all this lovely textured background with the sponging, the Brusho and the salt, and I also got that lovely light coming through as well, so I'm really pleased with that. And now I am actually going to use some framing tape to remove the masking fluid. It comes off quite nicely there. And as you can see, that lovely light yellow underpainting is coming through really nicely. I'm using a Woolies Wonder small brush here. You can use a stencil brush or a hog hair brush, a synthetic brush, or even a sponge. What I'm using it for is because some of those hard edges at the bottom of the tree look a little bit awkward. So I've actually wet the brush and I'm sort of scrubbing at the bottom there. It's not going to completely get rid of it, but it's going to soften that hard edge. So I'm going to repeat this process with all of the bottoms of the trees there, just to soften each of the edges at the bottom, and it just makes them look like they are growing out of the ground as well. Now I'm going to paint at the bottom of the tree using some yellow with a touch of Paynes grey. It's such a lovely simple palette this, just using these 3 colours, working damp into damp with my size 4 round brush, adding a little bit more Paynes grey into this yellow wash now to paint on damp into damp a darker green as well. I'm using some of this dark green, painting wet on dry in the foreground as well, making some of the greens a bit lighter here and there, and I'm using using my size 4 brush. This is a fun bit. I'm actually painting the marks on the birch tree with my size 4 brush with a mixture of the Paynes grey with a little bit of burnt umber, working wet on dry and just painting these sort of random marks. But if you look at the photograph, hopefully it'll inspire you to paint these marks because they are so much fun to do and they are so effective. It really does bring these trees to life. What I'm doing now is I'm using my size 10 brush. I've just got some clean water on it and I'm going over this damp paint, and what happens is it creates some shadow colour. Don't work it too much, just glaze that clean water over the left side, the light's coming from the right. So as you can see here, I'm painting some more marks now on the trees, wet on dry with the Paynes grey and the burnt umber with my size 4 brush, and just trying to be as random as I can with these marks. And because I'm right-handed, I've started on the left-hand side, and it prevents me sort of smudging any of my work if I started on the right working to the left. So if you're left-handed, you might want to start on the right-hand side. To speed things up a little bit, you might want to paint, as I've done there, 4 sort of birch trees in a row and then wet them with a clean sort of watery brush 4 times in a row as well. So it sort of stops you having to keep swapping brushes all the time. It does take a little while to paint these trees, but it's well worth it and it is quite therapeutic. It's a good idea now to allow the painting to dry. Once the painting is dry, I'm using my natural sponge again and tapping on some yellow green. That's mostly yellow with a touch of the Paynes grey. And I'm actually sort of tapping this over some of the trees that didn't quite work out with the framing tape, you know, sort of looked a bit dodgy. So it's quite a good idea. You can actually use this method. I'm using some darker green now just to tap over and to create some sort of more textures and shadows as well. And I'm actually squeezing the paint straight onto the sponge and just wiping it on the palette because I felt I was introducing too much moisture all the time. And I'm just tapping this yellow straight from the tube literally onto the surface. Bear in mind my sponge is damp. I always sort of run it under the tap, wring all the water out and use a sort of damp sponge to actually paint with. I always find I get the best results that way. I am now sponging on very dark green. That's the Paynes grey with the yellow. What's quite nice here is you have just got these 3 colours to work with. I've also added some burnt umber. And look, I'm mixing with my sponge just to get this really dark, creamy, thick paint on here to get these shadows to really stand out. But remember, your light is very important as well, so don't get too carried away. I know sometimes I do because I'm just enjoying it so much and I forget about the light. The light's so important. You have, remember, got the masking fluid underneath there, reserving that light yellow as well. I'm also sponging a little bit at the bottom of the trees as well, just to create some nice textures there. Working wet on dry with a yummy dark green, that's the Paynes grey with a touch of yellow. And I'm spattering some yellow paint wet on dry here using my size 10 brush. It gives you bigger blobs. Use a smaller brush or even a toothbrush if you want some finer blobs there. I'm also mixing up a little bit more of the dark green and spattering some darker marks here as well, just to create some textures and details in the foreground grasses as well. I thought it'd be quite nice as well to paint some grasses wet on dry here using my size 6 brush, just to really sort of create some depth in the painting sort of bigger, longer grasses in the foreground, having them shorter and lighter in the distance. I thought it'd be quite nice to spatter some white paint. You don't have to do this, but I wanted to give a little bit of sparkle in the foreground and in the trees as well. I've mixed up some yellow with the white here to create a really lovely light yellow using my size 4 brush there, just sort of finishing off with a few more highlighted sort of grasses in the foreground and underneath the trees as well. I'm removing the washi tape. It's got a reasonable light white border here. I think I had a little bit of leakage on the left there, but not to worry. So here is the finished painting, and it's time to decide, do I need to do any more to it? And I've decided to use some of the bokeh technique. So I've got my stencil, my natural sponge, clean water. Painting is dry now, and I've lifted off with the sponge and dabbed off with the paper towel as well. I'm using a magic sponge here to do the same, and I'm lifting off again with my paper towel, varying the sizes of the circles on the stencils as well. And here is a finished painting. I've removed the tape to reveal a lovely white border, and it's a really nice way of presenting your work if you're not going to frame it. So I really hope you enjoyed this step-by-step tutorial. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments section below. If you would like to support the content that I create here on YouTube and get access to my exclusive tutorials and downloadable outline sketches, why not think about joining my Patreon membership? Please see the description below for more details of joining the membership. Thank you so much for watching this tutorial. Happy painting. Bye for now.